The security guard's grip was firm but not unkind. I remember that detail clearly because it mattered. He wasn't being cruel about it. He was just doing his job, which somehow made the whole thing worse. His hand on my shoulder wasn't aggressive. It was almost apologetic, like he understood what was happening but had his instructions, and instructions were instructions. I can still see the ballroom behind him. The Plaza Hotel's grand salon, all gold leaf and crystal chandeliers, the kind of space that makes you understand, on a cellular level, what money actually means. $50,000 just to rent the room for 8 hours. The flowers alone, those imported Dutch roses and peonies, cost more than my first car. I know this because I paid for them. I know the exact number because I'd stared at the invoice for 20 minutes, watching my bank account balance shrink to a number I hadn't seen since I was 22 years old. "Your brother would like you to leave now," the security guard said quietly. Not harshly. That was the worst part, the gentleness of it. I nodded. I didn't argue. I'd learned a long time ago that arguing when you're the one being removed from a room never ends well. You just accept it. You swallow it. You become the kind of person who knows how to leave gracefully because leaving is what you've always been good at. Leaving rooms, leaving conversations, leaving your own needs on the shelf so someone else's could take priority. It was 3 minutes past 10 at night. The reception had been in full swing for less than 40 minutes. I turned to leave, and that's when I saw my mother's face. She was standing near the dessert table, a plate of untouched food in her hands, her eyes going wide as she watched the security guard escort me toward the exit. My mother, who'd worked double shifts at the hospital for 30 years, who'd never asked me for anything, who'd stood in the background of every important moment of my life nodding with pride, suddenly looked small. I mouthed, "It's okay," but I'm not sure she believed me. The November air hit my face as I stepped outside, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. Not because I was overwhelmed or because I was crying. I wasn't doing either of those things. I was standing on the steps of the Plaza Hotel in a rented tuxedo that fit perfectly, because I'd been careful to get it fitted properly, and I was trying to understand how the most important night of my little brother's life had just become the night he asked me to disappear. My phone was in my pocket, and I didn't check it. I knew what I'd find if I did. Nothing, because nobody was going to call me. Marcus certainly wasn't going to call me, and nobody else knew I'd been asked to leave, which meant I'd be walking around with this knowledge alone for at least the next few hours, possibly longer. I started walking. The city was alive around me in that way only New York City can be on a Friday night in November. People were laughing, rushing, living their lives with the kind of unself-consciousness that comes from knowing you belong exactly where you are. I didn't have that feeling. I hadn't had that feeling in so long I sometimes forgot what it felt like. 3 hours later, I was sitting in an all-night diner in Midtown, stirring coffee that had gone cold, when my phone finally buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "He's asking about you. I think you need to come back." I didn't respond. I just sat there, watching the steam rise off someone else's soup at a table across from mine, and I thought about how I'd gotten here. How every choice I'd made in the last 15 years had led to this specific moment, sitting in a diner at 1 in the morning, estranged from my little brother on what was supposed to be the best day of his life. Let me tell you something about what it means to be the older brother in a family where the father leaves. Was 8 when our father walked out, not dramatically, not in the middle of a fight or a scandal. He just stopped showing up. One day he was there sitting in the kitchen reading the newspaper, and the next day he called from somewhere in Florida and said he wasn't coming back. Simple as that. A man deciding that the life he'd built wasn't the life he wanted to live, and being selfish enough to walk away from his responsibilities without any of the guilt that might have made the whole thing slightly more bearable. Marcus was 2. I remember holding him while my mother cried in the bedroom. He was so small. I was so small, but somehow I was still bigger. And somehow I understood, even at that age, that being bigger meant I was responsible for making sure he never felt what I was feeling in that moment, which was the sensation of being abandoned by the one person who was supposed to teach you what it meant to be a man. "Don't cry," I told my brother, who wasn't crying. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." That was the promise I made, and I didn't even understand I was making it yet. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment in Queens, Astoria to be specific, the kind of neighborhood where nobody had much money, but everybody had dignity, the kind of place where people worked 2 jobs and still worried about rent. My mother was a nurse. She still is, and she made good money by neighborhood standards, but she was also raising 2 kids alone, which meant nothing was easy, and everything required calculation. I became good at math early. Not calculus or trigonometry, but the math that actually mattered. The math of survival. $240 for rent per person, divided by 4 weeks, minus what we needed for groceries, minus electricity, minus the phone bill, minus everything else. Subtract my mother's work schedule from the hours Marcus needed supervision. Calculate backwards from my bedtime to figure out when I needed to wake up to get him ready for school before I went to school myself. By the time I was 10, I could do all of this in my head. By the time I was 12, I was doing the actual paperwork, filling out the financial aid forms, applying for assistance programs, writing letters to the school explaining that yes, we qualified for free lunch, and no, we didn't feel bad about it. My mother never asked me to do these things. That's important to understand. She didn't sit me down and say, "Son, I need you to grow up now." She just struggled quietly while I watched, and I decided that the burden she was carrying was too heavy for one person, so I'd help carry it. That's what you do when you love someone. That's what they teach you without ever teaching you explicitly. Marcus was a good kid, smart, funny, the kind of child who made people smile just by existing in a room. He had our mother's eyes, brown and warm and trusting, and he had a way of looking at you that made you feel like you were the most important thing in his world, which you were because his world was small and it was just us. I made sure of that. I made sure his world was contained and safe and predictable. Every morning I woke him up before I went to school. I made his lunch, usually peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, sometimes turkey if the sales had been good. I packed his backpack. I walked him to school if I had time, and if I didn't have time, I made sure Mrs. Chen from the apartment next door was paying attention, and I'd give her a subtle nod, and she'd make sure he got there okay. Nobody asked her to do this, but that's how neighborhoods worked. People watched out for each other's kids because the alternative was accepting that some children were going to fall through the cracks, and nobody wanted to live in a world where that was acceptable. I picked him up every day at 3. Even in high school, I'd leave early or arrange my schedule so I could pick him up at 3. I'd take him to the deli where we knew the owner, and he'd always give Marcus an extra cookie with his after-school snack. We'd do homework together, his, and then, once I got older, my own. I'd make dinner, nothing fancy, but it was warm, and it was clean, and it was made with the specific intention of nourishing him. My mother would come home from her shift at 11 or midnight, exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. It was the kind of exhaustion that came from knowing you were failing somehow, even though you weren't. I'd have Marcus ready for bed. I'd have cleaned the apartment. I'd have left her a plate of food covered with aluminum foil. She'd find me sometimes, sitting in the kitchen at 1 in the morning, a book open in front of me that I wasn't reading, just staring at the wall. She'd put her hand on my shoulder and say, "Thank you." And I'd say, "He's asleep. Make sure you eat something before you sleep." And she'd nod. And we'd both understand that we were the only 2 adults in the room. And that was just how it was going to be. Everything changed when Marcus got sick. He was 7. I was 15. It was February, and the cold had that particular quality that winter in New York has. Not just cold, but the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes you understand, on a primal level, why the human body was not designed for this climate. Marcus caught what we thought was a regular cold. It wasn't. It was pneumonia, the kind that ambushed him quietly, that we didn't understand was serious until he woke up one night at 2 in the morning, struggling to breathe, his small chest heaving like he was trying to pull oxygen out of an air that didn't have any. I remember carrying him to the car. I remember the drive to the emergency room. I remember the fluorescent lights and the smell of disinfectant and the way the doctors' faces looked, concerned but professional, which meant they didn't want to scare us, but they were actually scared. My mother was at work. She was always at work. I called her, and within 20 minutes she was there, still in her scrubs, still smelling like the hospital she'd just come from. Her face going pale as the doctors started explaining to her about oxygen saturation levels and antibiotics, and the possibility that this could get worse before it got better. We stayed at the hospital for 5 days. My mother was with him during the day, and I was with him at night, because someone needed to watch him while he slept, needed to be there in case something changed, needed to be the responsible person in the room who didn't panic. I was 15 years old, and I understood that my childhood had ended. I was sitting in a hospital chair at 3 in the morning, watching my baby brother's chest rise and fall, listening to the machines beep and hum around him, and I made a decision. I decided that this pain, this fear, this uncertainty was never going to happen to him again if I could prevent it. I decided that I would do whatever it took to make sure he never experienced poverty the way I experienced it. Never felt the desperation of not having enough money for medicine. Never spent a night in a hospital chair wondering if his younger sibling was going to be okay. It was a noble decision. It was also an impossible one, but I didn't know that yet. I dropped out of college a year later. Nobody forced me to do it. That's what I want to be clear about. Nobody sat me down and said, "Your family needs you to sacrifice." I looked at the numbers, the tuition, the loan applications, the financial aid forms that showed we didn't qualify for enough help. And I looked at my mother, who'd been promoted to charge nurse and was now working even longer hours. And I looked at Marcus, who'd been accepted to Columbia with a scholarship, but whose scholarship didn't cover everything. And I did the math. My mother was making $60,000 a year. Marcus's scholarship covered tuition, but not housing or books or living expenses. My father was paying no child support. He'd disappeared to somewhere in the Southwest, and we'd stopped hearing from him years ago. The numbers didn't add up unless I made them add up. "I'm going to take a year off," I told my guidance counselor. "Work for a bit. Then I'll go back." She nodded like she understood, but she didn't understand. Nobody understood except my mother, who grabbed my hand in the kitchen late one night and said, "Don't do this. Don't throw your life away for us." "I'm not throwing it away," I said. "I'm postponing it. I'll go back." But we both knew I wasn't going to go back. Time is a funny thing. When you're living in it, a year feels like forever. But when you look back on it, years pass in what feels like moments. I got a job at a warehouse in Long Island City. Data entry, inventory management. The kind of work that doesn't require you to think too much and pays you just enough money to matter. The pay was decent, enough that combined with my mother's income, we could cover rent, groceries, the occasional emergency. But more importantly, it gave me structure. I worked from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. Then I'd go home and manage the apartment, pick up Marcus from school, help him with homework, make dinner. My mother would come home from her shift at the hospital, exhausted and grateful, and I'd somehow be standing there with a plate of food ready and Marcus doing his reading exercises. Years passed. Marcus went to high school. He was brilliant, not just smart, but genuinely exceptional. He had a gift for languages, for understanding systems, for looking at problems and seeing solutions. He was also kind, which was the thing I was most proud of. He could have been arrogant about his intelligence. He could have looked down on the neighborhood kids who weren't going to college. Instead, he was kind to everyone. I noticed something around his junior year. He'd stop himself sometimes, like he was about to tell me about something he was excited about. A girl he liked, a test he'd aced, a game he'd won, and then he'd pause, and he'd look at me, and I'd see something flicker in his eyes. Guilt. Awareness that I wasn't experiencing the same things he was. "Tell me," I'd always say. And he would. But there was always this edge to it now. Like he was apologizing for having experiences I wasn't having. I hated that. I hated that my sacrifice had become visible enough that he could see it and feel bad about it. "I'm fine," I'd tell him. "I like my job. I'm happy. You focus on school, okay?" He'd nod, but I knew he didn't believe me. Because how could he believe me when I was clearly not fine? When I was clearly working a job that paid me just enough to survive, clearly passing up opportunities, clearly dedicating my entire life to making sure he could have the opportunities I'd lost. But I was happy. That's the thing people don't understand about sacrifice. It's not always miserable. Sometimes it's actually peaceful in its own way. I'd made a choice, and I was living with the consequences of that choice, and there was a kind of purity in that. I knew what I was doing and why I was doing it, and every decision I made was in service of that purpose. The warehouse job became 2 jobs. I'd work at the warehouse until 2, then I'd work at a supermarket from 4 until midnight. Nights were for sleeping, but I didn't sleep much. Maybe 5 hours, sometimes less. My mother begged me to stop, but I needed the money. Marcus was applying to colleges now, and scholarships were competitive, and I wanted to make sure that anything Marcus might need, test preparation, application fees, a new computer, was something I could provide without hesitation. He got into Columbia. Full scholarship. Academic excellence, the letter said. Your son's intellectual capabilities are exceptional. My mother cried when she read it. My brother cried. I stood in the kitchen and felt something shift inside me, something that felt a lot like peace. He was going to be okay. He was going to escape this neighborhood and this apartment and this life that had been defined by not having enough. He was going to go somewhere where he could become the person he was meant to be, and it was partly because I'd worked my ass off to make sure he could. I picked up a 3rd job after that, delivering packages for Amazon on weekends. It was brutal work, long hours, bad pay, packages that were inexplicably heavy for their size. But it paid cash, and cash meant I could build a cushion. Cash meant that if Marcus needed something, I'd have it. Somewhere in that blur of work and exhaustion, I stopped thinking of this as temporary. I stopped telling myself I'd go back to school eventually, that I'd do something with my life beyond working warehouse jobs and delivery shifts. This was my life now. This was what I did. I worked, I provided. I made sure Marcus had what he needed. I was okay with that. I had to be okay with that. The alternative was admitting that my father was right, that walking away was sometimes the only option, and I wasn't going to be that person. But then Marcus graduated from Columbia, and he went to law school. And law school was expensive in a different way. Tuition was covered by loans, sure, but living expenses, books, test preparation courses, all of it required money. And I had money now, not much, but some. Enough to help. He didn't want to take it. I remember the conversation we had about it. We were sitting in the same deli where we'd gone thousands of times. Corner of 31st Avenue and 30th Street. The place that had been there forever and would probably be there forever. The kind of constant that made you feel like something in the world was stable. I can take out more loans, he said. You don't need to, I replied. I have money. It's not a problem. You've already given me everything. I've given you what an older brother should give a younger brother. That's different from everything. But even then, I could see the weight of it on him. The understanding that I'd sacrificed, that he owed me something, that his success was built partially on my willingness to give up my own life. He got out of law school without more debt than necessary. He got a job at a prestigious firm, Morrison and Sterling, one of the names you actually know, as an associate. He was making good money, really good money. The kind of money that meant he could rent an apartment in Manhattan, could eat at restaurants that didn't have dollar menus, could build a life that looked nothing like the one we'd grown up in. I was happy for him. I was also watching him move further and further away from the person I'd known. Not in a bad way exactly, just in the way that happens when someone gets out. They become someone else. They leave you behind, not deliberately, just inevitably. Marcus called me one Sunday in October. He sounded different, lighter. "I met someone," he said. "Her name is Sarah. I was in the warehouse at the time on my day off doing inventory." I set down the clipboard and smiled into the phone, even though he couldn't see me. "Tell me everything," I said, and he did. He told me about meeting her at the firm's summer associate event. She was the daughter of Robert Ashford, founder of a major investment firm. She'd gone to Yale, then to Harvard Law School, and she was currently doing corporate law at a different firm, a bigger, more prestigious one than where Marcus worked. "She's incredible," Marcus said, and I could hear something in his voice that I'd never heard before. It was hope, but it was also fear. The fear of wanting something so badly that losing it would actually hurt. "When do I get to meet her?" I asked. "Soon," he said. "I'm taking her to dinner with you and Mom, next Saturday." The dinner was at a restaurant in Manhattan. Not one of those trendy places with the 2-hour wait times, but the kind of upscale restaurant where waiters wore gloves and they refilled your water glass every time you took a sip. My mother was nervous. She'd bought a new dress, something elegant but not flashy, trying to strike a balance between looking nice and looking like she belonged in a room like this. Sarah was beautiful in the way women are beautiful when they've never had to worry about money. Not that she was objectively more beautiful than anyone else, but she had a kind of confidence that came from always having belonged to rooms like the one we were sitting in. She was friendly too, which I appreciated. She asked my mother about her work. She asked me about mine. She didn't make any of us feel small, though she could have. What I noticed, though, was how Marcus looked at her. Like she was proof of something. Proof that he'd made it, that he'd successfully escaped, that he was now a different person who belonged in her world, instead of the one we'd come from. "Your brother is wonderful," Sarah told me at one point, when Marcus had excused himself to use the restroom. "I know he's grateful for everything you've done for him." I didn't know what to say to that. I didn't like being thanked for something that was just the natural consequence of being a brother. It reduced something that felt noble and complex into something simple and transactional. "I'm happy he's happy," I said. "He is," Sarah replied. "He's genuinely happy. I can tell because of the way he talks about you. Most people don't talk about their sacrifices like their victories, but he does." This made me uncomfortable. I'd never thought of what I'd done as a sacrifice. It was just what you did. It was the math that had to add up. It was responsibility. 6 months later, Marcus called to tell me he was engaged. He didn't get down on one knee in some elaborate way. He just called me at work at 7 in the morning when I was already 3 hours into an inventory shift, and he said, "She said yes. I asked last night. I'm getting married, and I want you to be my best man." I remember the exact moment he said this. I was standing in the warehouse, surrounded by boxes. The fluorescent lights casting everything in this harsh white light that made the world look two-dimensional. "Of course I'll be your best man," I said. What I didn't say was, how am I going to afford to do this? But I should have. I should have said it immediately. Should have been honest about my financial situation. Should have explained that being best man for someone at the level of wedding I was already anticipating would cost money I didn't have. Instead, I just said yes. And then I started doing the math. Sarah's parents were going to be involved. That meant the wedding was going to be expensive in a way that weddings in my world had never been expensive. Not like hiring a band and renting a VFW hall. This was going to be Plaza Hotel expensive, imported flowers expensive, celebrity chef expensive. The best man traditionally pays for the bachelor party. I knew this. I'd watched it on television. The bachelor party for Marcus and Sarah's circle would probably run me $5,000–6,000 at minimum. The rehearsal dinner. The best man often pays for that or co-organizes it, another $3,000 to $5,000 depending on what I did. The rental tux, the flights if there was a destination wedding, the gifts, the miscellaneous expenses that always seemed to pop up. I started working more. I added another delivery shift to my weekends. I took an extra hour at the supermarket every night. I was now working approximately 80 hours a week, and I was still only making just over $40,000 a year. It wasn't enough. Not even close. I called my bank and asked about taking out a personal loan. $12,000 over 5 years. The payments would be about $250 a month. I could do that. I could absolutely do that. It wouldn't be comfortable, but it was doable. The loan was approved within 3 days. I didn't tell anyone about this. Not my mother. Not Marcus. Especially not Marcus. I just started working the extra hours and taking the extra shifts and putting money into a separate account that I'd opened, specifically for wedding-related expenses. Marcus called me one evening when I was heading into the supermarket for my night shift. "I need to talk to you about the wedding," he said. My heart rate picked up. I thought he was going to ask me to pay for something I wasn't already planning to pay for. I thought he was going to tell me that the budget had increased, that something had changed. Sarah's parents want to host the engagement party. They're talking about it being pretty fancy. They want you there as best man, obviously, and they're going to coordinate with you about some things. Okay, I said carefully. They're going to invite a lot of people. Sarah's side of the family is large and successful. Important people in finance, law, business. I wanted you to know that going in so you're not surprised. What he meant was, these people are going to be richer than you. They're going to notice that you don't belong. I'll be fine, I said, and I meant it. I'd learned long ago that belonging isn't about how much money you have. It's about being confident enough in your purpose that you don't need anyone else's approval. The engagement party was at their apartment. Not Sarah's apartment, but her parents' apartment. The apartment they maintained in Manhattan because they also had a house in the Hamptons and a ski lodge in Aspen. It was the kind of place that made you understand viscerally what money actually looked like when you had enough of it. Robert Ashford, Sarah's father, greeted me at the door. He was tall, silver-haired, the kind of man who'd been handsome his whole life and had never had to work very hard for anything. He had a firm handshake and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Marcus's brother," he said, like he was placing me somewhere in a mental filing system. "The one who works in inventory, data management, and warehouse operations," I corrected gently. "But yeah, basically." He nodded like that made sense. Like all jobs that didn't involve being an executive at a major corporation were basically the same job, just with different titles. "Well, we're grateful to have you here," he said, in the tone of voice someone uses when they're grateful for something, the way you're grateful for a necessary vaccination. Appreciated. For being over with. The party was beautiful and absolutely intimidating. Everything was tasteful and expensive without being obvious about it. The catering was from a restaurant I'd never heard of. The wine, Sarah's father made sure to mention this, was a 2009 Bordeaux that had been stored in their climate-controlled cellar for over a decade. The flowers were orchids, dozens of them, arranged with the kind of precision that suggested someone had been paid significant money to do it. I watched Marcus move through the crowd, and I saw something shift in him. He was becoming more polished. His accent, which had always carried a trace of Queens in it, was smoothing out. His gestures, his mannerisms, everything was sliding toward a kind of corporate cosmopolitanism that I recognized but didn't fully understand. Sarah was radiant. She was in her element among these people. Her family, her friends, the world she'd always belonged to. She put her hand on Marcus's arm and introduced him to people, and I could see him becoming more comfortable with each introduction, like he was shedding something and putting on something else. Melissa, Sarah's best friend and maid of honor, found me standing alone by the hors d'oeuvres. "You're Marcus's brother," she said. It was a statement, not a question. "I am. It's nice that you're here," she said, and I heard the subtext immediately. "It's nice that you're here, even though you're clearly not supposed to be." "Thanks for including me," I replied, keeping my tone light. "Oh," Marcus insisted, she said. Sarah's parents wanted to keep it just close family and important contacts, but Marcus said his brother was non-negotiable. Marcus had said that. My little brother had literally told his future father-in-law that I was non-negotiable. That was worth something. That was actually worth a lot. The rehearsal dinner was my responsibility as best man. I'd planned it for weeks, researching venues, calculating costs, trying to figure out how to do something that felt appropriate for the occasion without bankrupting myself completely. I settled on an Italian restaurant in Manhattan. Not one of the Michelin-starred places. I couldn't afford that. But a good restaurant, the kind that had been around for 30 years and had a reputation for doing things right. The owner was a man named Giancarlo, who'd immigrated from Sicily in the 70s, and he had a quality of genuine pride in his work that I respected. "Paying for dinner for about 60 people, I told him. "It's my brother's rehearsal dinner. I need this to be good. I need it to feel like it matters." Giancarlo looked at me for a long moment. "You love your brother," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Then this will be perfect. Don't worry. I'll make sure." And he did. Giancarlo and his staff created something beautiful. 6 courses, wine pairings, the kind of meal that made you feel like you were being taken care of, being honoring, being celebrated. Marcus's extended family, my mother, a few distant cousins on our father's side who'd actually bothered to show up. A friend or two from law school sat comfortably among Sarah's family and friends. The food was extraordinary. People were happy. It felt like something that mattered, like a moment of real significance before the wedding day itself. Then Melissa said something to her friend, something just loud enough for the table to hear, about the restaurant being a little casual for an event like this, and Sarah's mother corrected her gently, but the correction landed like a criticism, like I should have been planning something more upscale, like my effort, which had been genuine and had cost me money I didn't have, was somehow insufficient. I saw Sarah notice the interaction. I saw her reach over and squeeze my arm. "It's perfect," she said. "This is exactly what rehearsal dinner should be. Warm, personal, not pretentious." My mother just has opinions about everything. But that was the moment I started to understand something about this wedding. It wasn't just about celebrating Marcus and Sarah. It was about proving something, that Sarah's family's world was the right world, that Marcus had successfully entered it. and that anyone who came from outside of that world would always be marked as somehow less than. The week before the wedding, Marcus asked me to get coffee with him. We met at the same deli where my mother used to take us when we were kids. It was still there, the same counter, the same man behind it. Though older now, his hair completely gray, he still made the same bagels. Nothing had changed except us. Marcus looked nervous. He was wearing his work suit, expensive but not ostentatious, the kind of suit someone wears when they're trying to look successful without trying too hard to look successful. He looked like a lawyer. He looked like he'd succeeded. "I need to talk to you about something," he said, after we'd ordered our coffee. My stomach tightened. This was the moment where he was going to tell me something I wasn't going to want to hear. "Sarah's parents have some concerns," he started, and I knew immediately that this was code for something specific. "About what?" I asked, even though I already knew. "About the optics of the wedding party. Sarah's father has some business relationships he's going to be entertaining at the wedding, really important people, and he's worried that having too many people from outside the usual circle might give the wrong impression." "The wrong impression about what?" I asked, knowing exactly what impression he meant. Marcus looked down at his coffee. "About our family's background. About where we come from." There it was. The thing we'd never explicitly discussed but had always been aware of. The fact that Marcus had escaped, had become someone else, had successfully reinvented himself as someone important. And now his brother, his working class, warehouse job-having brother, was going to be standing next to him in a tuxedo at the Plaza Hotel, visibly marking him as someone who'd come from nothing. "Okay," I said. "It's not okay," Marcus said quickly. "I don't think it's okay. I don't think there's anything wrong with where we come from. I think it's actually extraordinary that. But you also think I shouldn't stand next to you at the altar," I said quietly. "No, that's not. I want you at the altar. I need you at the altar. You're my brother. You're the person I trust more than anyone in the world. But Sarah's parents have been covering a lot of the wedding costs, and they have specific ideas about how things should look. And I don't fit those ideas," I finished. Marcus didn't answer, which was an answer in itself. "What are they suggesting?" I asked. "That maybe you could sit with the extended family instead of being in the wedding party. That you'd still be there, you'd still be honored, but it would be less visible." I set down my coffee. The deli was playing the same radio station they'd been playing for the last 15 years. Same songs, same everything. "Okay," I said again. "That's it? Just okay? What else do you want me to say?" "You're getting married. Your fiancé's family is uncomfortable with the fact that your brother is poor. That's not a complicated situation. The solution is obvious." "I don't want this to be the solution," Marcus said. I want there to be a way to make everyone happy." "There isn't," I said. "Someone is always going to be unhappy. The question is who." Marcus stared at me. "Are you unhappy?" I thought about this. I was standing at a crossroads, and I understood that what I said next was going to determine something important about what was going to happen next. "No," I said finally. "I'm not unhappy. I'm just tired. I'm tired of pretending like this isn't who I am. I'm tired of pretending like my job is temporary, or my apartment is temporary, or my life is temporary. This is my life, Marcus, and I'm okay with that. But I'm only okay with it if I can stop apologizing for it." Marcus reached across the table and grabbed my hand. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know you are," I replied. "But sorry doesn't solve the problem. You're at a point in your life where you have to choose, and I understand that. I've always understood that. The question is just whether you're going to make peace with that choice or spend the rest of your life feeling guilty about it. He didn't let go of my hand. I don't want you to feel like I'm abandoning you. You're not abandoning me. You're building a life. That's what people do. They grow up, they move out, they build lives with people who aren't their family. It's natural. I'm not angry about it, Marcus. I just need you to be honest about it instead of trying to make it seem like something it's not. We sat there for a long moment, our coffee getting cold between us. I'll sit with the extended family, I told him finally. It's fine. It'll be less awkward this way anyway. I don't really know how to be in a wedding party. I don't know what people are supposed to do. I'll sit with Mom, and I'll watch you marry Sarah, and I'll be happy for you. That's all that matters. It's not all that matters, Marcus said, but maybe it was. Maybe that was all that was supposed to matter, and everything else was just the noise of trying to make people fit into spaces that were never designed for them. The morning of the wedding, I woke up early. Too early. It was 5 in the morning and I couldn't sleep, so I just lay in bed thinking about everything that had led to this moment. I thought about my father leaving. I thought about my mother working double shifts. I thought about holding Marcus in the hospital when he was 7 and sick, promising him that I would take care of him. I thought about every warehouse shift, every delivery route, every moment of exhaustion that I'd pushed through because he was counting on me. I thought about all the moments he'd looked at me with guilt in his eyes, understanding what I'd given up for him. And I thought about how this was where it was supposed to end. Him marrying someone from a world I could never be part of, building a life that was completely separate from mine, becoming someone who didn't need his older brother to take care of him anymore. It was the natural order of things. It was how it was supposed to be. I got out of bed and went for a walk. The neighborhood was just waking up. The streets were empty except for the early workers heading to their jobs, the street vendors setting up for the day. I walked past the deli where Marcus and I'd had coffee. I walked past the park where I'd taken him when he was 3. I walked past the school he'd gone to, the corner store where he'd bought penny candies with coins I'd saved up for. Everything looked smaller than I remembered it. Or maybe I'd just gotten bigger. Maybe the weight of everything I'd been carrying had expanded me in some way. My mother called me at 8. "Are you awake?" she asked. "Yeah, Mom, I'm awake. The wedding is at 5. Are you ready?" "I'm ready." There was a pause on the line. I could hear her breathing, could feel through the phone line the specific anxiety she was carrying. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I'm fine. How are you doing?" "I'm nervous." "I'm happy, but I'm also nervous." "Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," I said. "It's okay to be both." I hung up the phone and went home to shower and get dressed. The rented tuxedo fit perfectly. I'd made sure of that. I'd gone to the tailor 3 times to get the measurements exactly right. The shirt was crisp white. The tie was black silk. In the mirror, I looked like someone who belonged at the Plaza Hotel. I looked like someone who could stand in a room with Sarah's family and not be visibly marked as someone who'd come from nothing. It was all just careful tailoring and the right angles of light. My mother picked me up at 3. She was wearing the dress she'd bought for the engagement party, pressed carefully, her hair done up in a way she only did for special occasions. She looked beautiful. She looked nervous. "He's going to be fine," I told her, even though she hadn't asked. "I know he is," she said. "I'm just remembering when he was born. How small he was, how you held him and promised to take care of him. And now he's marrying someone, building a life that doesn't involve us as much anymore. It's strange. It's good," I said. "It means he's okay. It means he doesn't need us to survive anymore." "But I still want to be needed," my mother said quietly. I understood that. I'd been trying to be needed my entire life. Starting the business with Patricia was the first time in my life that I'd made a decision purely for myself, purely because I wanted to do something. We called the company Ashford Events. Patricia wanted to honor the place where we'd met, the wedding that had started everything. We specialized in events for working-class families, families like mine, who wanted beautiful celebrations but didn't have the resources to book the high-end firms that catered to the wealthy. We kept prices reasonable. We made sure that creating beautiful memories wasn't something only accessible to people with significant financial means. And we became good at what we did, really good, because Patricia understood the aesthetics and I understood the operations, and we both understood the importance of making people feel like their lives mattered enough to celebrate properly. The business grew. Within 2 years, we were coordinating 50 events a year. Within 5 years, we were one of the most sought-after firms in New York for mid-range events. We were profitable, we were successful, and more importantly, we were helping people. I used the money from the inheritance to fund the business. I used my salary from the business to buy a small house in Brooklyn, right near the brownstone where Marcus and Sarah lived. I traveled. I took months off. I went back to school and got a business degree, not because I needed it for the business, but because I wanted to understand the systems I was working within. For the first time in my life, I was living for myself. The funny thing about working in events is that you see patterns repeat. Families celebrate the same way they've always celebrated. Children grow up in environments that mirror their parents' childhoods. The cycle continues unless someone deliberately breaks it. Marcus and Sarah had a daughter 3 years after they started their practice. They named her Elena. And from the moment Elena was born, Marcus was obsessed with making sure she didn't grow up with the same sense of scarcity that we had, but Sarah was careful about it. She made sure that Elena understood the value of money, that she understood that things needed to be earned. That privilege without purpose was actually a kind of poverty. I watched them parent, and I was awed by how they balanced it. They gave her love and support, but they also gave her boundaries. They gave her opportunity, but they also gave her responsibility. One day, Elena, who was 8 at the time, asked me to explain why her father had been a lawyer doing corporate work when he started out, and why he'd changed to public interest law. I told her the truth. I told her that her father had been trying to prove something, that he'd been trying to become someone he thought he needed to be, instead of someone he actually wanted to be, and that eventually he'd figured out that the two things didn't have to be the same. "Did you ever do that?" she asked me. "Try to be someone you're not?" I thought about the question carefully. "No," I said. "But I did give up a lot of who I was because I thought I had to. And it took me a long time to figure out that I didn't." "Like what?" Elena asked. "Like myself," I said. "I gave up myself for a long time. When I turned 40, Marcus threw me a birthday party at the brownstone. It was simple, nothing like the elaborate events I coordinated for other people. Just family and close friends, good food, good conversation. Marcus gave a speech like he always did. He'd become comfortable with public speaking over the years, comfortable with expressing emotion and gratitude and the complicated feelings that he'd worked so hard to process. "My brother," he said, raising a glass, "has given me so much that I could never repay. But more importantly, he's taught me something that I try to teach my daughter every single day. He's taught me that real wealth isn't measured in money or status or the kind of job you have. Real wealth is measured in the choices you make about how you want to spend your time and the people you make those choices with. He looked directly at me. I was a fool when I was younger. I thought that the way to love someone was to help them succeed in my world, in the world I thought I needed to belong to. But my brother taught me something different. He taught me that the way to love someone is to stand next to them in their world, to honor their choices, to recognize that success looks different for different people. He paused. I'm grateful every single day for my brother. I'm grateful that he's here, that he's healthy, that he's finally allowing himself to have a life. And I'm grateful for the example he set for me about what it means to be loyal, what it means to be devoted, what it means to love someone completely and without condition. After everyone had left, after the party was over, Marcus and I sat in the garden, the same garden where my mother painted, where Elena played, where the family gathered. Do you remember? I asked. When you asked me why I paid for the wedding without telling you. Yes, Marcus said. I was thinking about that, I continued. I was thinking about how angry you were, how hurt. And I realized that you were right. You had a right to be angry, because I wasn't just paying for a wedding. I was making a statement. I was saying that I could do this, that I could handle it, that the burden was mine to carry, and I was denying you the opportunity to make your own choices about how you wanted to celebrate your life. I've thought about that a lot too, Marcus said quietly. I've thought about how I reacted, how scared I was that people would see how much you'd given up. And I realized that what I was actually scared of was that people would see how much I owed you. That they would understand that my success wasn't just about me, it was about sacrifice. About someone loving me enough to give up their life. But that's what family is, I said. That's what love is. It's interconnected. It's complicated. It's not about one person doing all the giving and another person doing all the receiving. I know that now, Marcus said. I know it in a way I didn't know it then. Patricia sold her stake in the company to me when she decided to retire. I've expanded the business significantly. We have offices in 3 states now, and we employ a team of 15 people. We've done events for celebrities, politicians, business people, all the people I never thought I'd end up serving. But the heart of the business is still the same. We do beautiful events for people who deserve beautiful celebrations but might not be able to afford them otherwise. We make sure that everyone, regardless of their financial situation, can feel like their life matters enough to commemorate. Marcus is now a partner in his firm. He and Sarah have 2 more children. They've won multiple awards for their public interest work. They're raising their kids to understand that success is about contribution, not accumulation. My mother is still painting. She's had 2 gallery shows and she actually sells her work now. She's finally doing what she loves without worrying about survival. And me, I run a successful business. I own a house. I travel whenever I want. I have time for myself and for the people I love. I'm not the sacrificial older brother anymore. I'm just a man who's built a life that makes sense to him. The most important thing, though, is this. I'm finally at peace with what happened at that wedding. I'm at peace with being asked to leave. I'm at peace with my brother's shame and my brother's subsequent redemption. I'm at peace with the fact that I gave up so much. And I'm at peace with the fact that what I gave up allowed someone I love to become who they needed to become. Because that's what family is. It's understanding that love isn't always simple. It's not always comfortable. It's sometimes asking someone to leave your wedding so you can feel like you belong. And it's sometimes forgiving them for asking. The real inheritance, I finally understand, wasn't the money my father left behind. The real inheritance was learning that sacrifice doesn't have to be forever. The real inheritance was understanding that you can give everything and still have room to receive. The real inheritance was my brother, standing in a garden 10 years after asking me to disappear, finally understanding what I'd known all along, that love doesn't keep score, but it does keep memory. And memories, it turns out, are the most valuable thing of all.